Very special thanks to Cars of Somerset for providing the Mugen Civic, of course, in this review, and their stock is constantly changing. In fact, this car sold before this video was even released, so of course if you want to check out what they've got, you can click the link right below this video in the description, and if you want them to find a car across the UK for you, of course they can do that as well. So find out all those details down below. Many years ago, I read a quote about the Lancia Delta, which has always stuck with me, and it was a quote which I really loved. The quote was to the effect of, if you ask a Lancia Delta owner why they bought one, the reason is always the same. I've always wanted one. And to me, that is such an applicable quote to cars like this. Because I can say straight off the bat, if there is any question in your mind as to whether or not a Mugen Civic is the car for you, then a Mugen Civic is not the car for you. That is how specialised this vehicle is, and it's not because it's bad in any particular way. In fact, I wouldn't say there's anything strictly bad or even remotely bad about this car in any sense. It's a very impressive hot hatch, but it's so specialised, it's so niched, even within the hot hatch market, that it would be frankly an insult to the car to be purchased by anyone but a superfan. And the reason why I say that is this. One of these vehicles, of which there are only 200 in existence, is designed to be like this next step in the evolution of the already great, but somewhat controversial FN2 generation Civic Type R. And of course that roughly ran from around 2006-ish to 2011, 2012 model years, depending on where you are. And there are a couple of different body styles. You've got this more UFO style car, which is popular in Europe. You've got the more four-door sedan style, which is popular in the US, I believe in Japan as well. You very, very rarely see those in the UK, but I must admit I've always liked that four-door Type R version myself. And in an interesting sense, it's actually the existence of that FN2 Type R, the one that isn't the Mugen, in other words, that actually contradicts this car. See, that one is already 9/10ths of what this is. This car doesn't hike the power up from 200 horsepower to 300, it doesn't add something crazy like rear-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, some massive turbo or launch control. It's basically more of a finely honed and fettled, as I said, evolution of an already very capable car. The problem is, you're paying a hell of a lot more for this limited edition car, in a very reminiscent sense to what an old Group B homologation road car was like, such as the aforementioned Lancia Delta Integrale, a Peugeot 205 T16, a Renault 5 Maxi Turbo, etc. The unfortunate thing is, with very few exceptions, hot hatches like those, which appreciate in value almost to a supercar level. You can easily pay six figures these days for something like a super rare Delta. That doesn't happen anymore. Try and find a hot hatch from the post-2000 era, which is even worth half of what it was when it was new. It doesn't happen that often. Even with rare ones like the Golf GTI Edition 30, they just don't become collector's pieces, at least not yet. This car, one of these 200, will, at least from the three that are currently for sale in the UK, cost you between 15 and 20 grand. That's a lot of money for a 2010 car. All three of the ones that are for sale on, for example, Auto Trader are from 2010. It's over a decade old, and they have as high as over 70,000 miles for the cheapest of those at over £15,000. To put that into perspective, that's the same age with similar mileage to a Jag XKR 5 litre for the same kind of price. Now to me that's a ridiculous comparison for a used hot hatch, and that brings me back to why I said that you should only buy this car if you absolutely want one. Because this is a vehicle for the superfan. It's the car where you don't think, do I want one? You don't wonder, do I need one? And you certainly don't need to compare it to a regular one. This is the car for people who already love the Civic Type R, but they have to have the ultimate version. that is the car for you, because you've got that exclusivity, it's got the extra visual package, and they did make a number of small upgrades here and there to just finally hone it even more. The problem is, because of the nature of the Type R engine and the nature of the car itself, unless you plan to track day this thing every weekend, you're just not going to get the best out of it, and you're certainly not going to notice any of those differences in a daily commute kind of sense. Plus, the problem is, if you do buy one of these and use it as a daily driver, as well as adding to the mileage, which in itself drops the value, you're going to inevitably wear the car. Dings, scrapes, scuffed rims, etc. All of these things which hurt resale value and certainly would hurt it from a collector's point of view. So it's one of those cars which is almost like an investment. It's right on the cutting edge of being a collector's hot hatch, one of the very few modern ones. But unless you plan to just keep it essentially sealed up in a garage somewhere, well, there's not really much point in buying it and adding all those miles. Because, as I said, the normal Type R can do most everything that this can do. Now, the problem that I have personally with the Civic Type R, and this applies to a lot of Honda Type R models, especially when it comes to daily driving scenarios, is that much like a superbike in the motorcycle world, the engines are designed to produce all of their best work at really high revs. Of course, that's why Type Rs are iconic. The problem is you're not doing those kind of revs in any kind of daily traffic unless your commute takes you across a racetrack or has roads with no traffic whatsoever. So in crawl, bumper to bumper, city traffic, it's useless. You won't even notice that it has a high performance engine, and because it has to be worked so hard to get the very small amount of torque out of that engine, only 142 pound-feet to begin with, well, the fuel economy isn't great either. It can peak at 41 to the gallon on the highway or the motorway here in the UK, but it averages 31, which is fine, but nothing special. Much like a modern superbike, like a BMW S1000 RR, for example, you get about 35 to the gallon out of a motorcycle of that caliber, because the engines are revving so high that you simply use more fuel, because you have to. It's not some low-end, torquey diesel, it's the exact opposite to that. Now, of course, a lot of hot hatch owners aren't going to care about that because you plan to drive the car hard and get the best out of it. It is, however, a fact that needs to be said, because it is an engine which loves to be worked hard. That's what it lives for. It's its entire purpose. In fact, with most Honda high-performance engines, they are designed to be driven like that. And the simple fact is, using that as a commuter in any kind of sense, you're just not getting the best out of it. So it's a car which is almost too niched for its own good, in some senses. You almost want to keep it as a collector's piece, but it feels like you're not doing the car justice by actually using it, but then when you do use it, you're not getting the best out of it, you're affecting the value at the same time, and then when you add all of these things together, it really highlights the fact of why I'm saying, why not just buy a normal Type R, even of this generation? Because here in the UK, a prime example is you can buy a, for example, higher mileage Type R, a non-Mugen, for as little as $4,000. That's for a high mileage car, of course. If you're willing to go lower, say 50-60,000 miles, which is fairly modest for a decade-old vehicle, you can pay $7,000. This, as I said, is at least double that, 15 to 20 grand on the higher end. But it's not all doom and gloom. What about if you actually do have the chance to do that? What if you can track day the car, or what if you do decide to go ahead and use one every day, maybe even just a normal Type R? Because given that they are sharing the same engine, they have the same kind of power, surely many of the things that I'm saying here could apply to that one as well. Well, on the one hand, yes, they do. In my opinion, the drawbacks are pretty much the same. But when you do have the chance to open the car up, much like any Type R, it comes alive. Once you hit that certain sweet spot of the revs, just as the engine is supposed to do, it does come alive. It gets much louder, much more fun. The acceleration pulls almost like a turbocharged car would, even though this is one of the last naturally aspirated Type Rs around. And in that sense, it's almost like a pivot point for the Type R, which also adds to the kind of nostalgia which this can have, even as a car that's not all that old. So it certainly has plenty of merit. The handling is fantastic, the brakes are really good. Of course, the design divides opinion. It's completely untraditional compared to all the Civics before it, but again, that could kind of slice its own little niche out of the Civic market, or the JDM market, you could say. In my opinion, it's a pretty cool looking car. If you really love the bigger wing and the different body kit and the little details, you could probably buy a replica kit for a normal Type R if you have to have it look like this. But again, that's down to you, it's down to personal preference. In terms of being a modern iconic hot hatch, it does live up to what you'd want a Type R to be. It lives up to the legacy for the most part, certainly in terms of straight line ability, its engine, its engineering. Handling-wise, I haven't driven a ton of older Type R models, so I can't say for sure yet on the channel, but what I will say is it certainly compares well to, for example, the Golf R32, the Audi S3 that I've driven. I would still choose those over this, but for somebody who wants this kind of experience, front-wheel drive, manual, high revving, low torque, kind of like a sport bike in a car body in some senses, with of course great Japanese reliability and engineering behind it as well, it delivers all of that, so you're not going to be disappointed in that sense. It just feels a little bit of a shame that because of the way it's designed, as I mentioned earlier on, you simply can't use that upper, say, 40% of what it's really capable of most of the time. Certainly not if you live in, for instance, a city where even the roads themselves aren't designed to get the best out of a car like this. So for me, as with one or two of the other vehicles that I've talked about and reviewed in Beards and Cars, it's a little bit of a conundrum. It has its fans, it has its merits, but in some ways, in my opinion at least, it could feel a little bit too specialised or too niched for its own good. In my opinion, if you are looking for a modern hot hatch that probably will become an investment, or at least has the potential for that, then this is probably one of them. Certainly currently on the market it looks that way. For the future, I would probably recommend going for something like a GR Yaris, because that really is kind of harkening back to that Group B homologation road car era. This has potential to be, but again, I wouldn't necessarily bet money on it. You could if you wanted to take the risk, but ultimately this is the car for somebody who watches this video and sees the car and says, I want that car. It's not for somebody who says, should I get that car? Or how does that car compare to a normal Type R? If you ask those questions at all, then the normal Type R will be more than good enough for you. Overall though, that's it for this review. Of course, stick around on the channel for more in future, and until next time I'll see you then, but for now, as always, thanks for watching.